Hey friends! Alright, so I have recently gotten to have the privilege of learning a little bit more about the book of Ruth, and I would like to share a little bit of my findings with you and some things that I know at least I can take from it. Alright, so just in general, the story of Ruth is about this woman that leaves her homeland to go with her mother-in-law after both her husbands pass away to Israel, and it's a really beautiful story of how she fully accepts and takes on their culture and way of life and follows God in many beautiful ways. It's a story that talks about how to follow God in real life in simple and ordinary ways. Sometimes life is a little messy and a little bit complicated, and things don't go always the way that we want them to. And following in God's footsteps and following his law is not always as simple as we would like. There's many exceptions, or there's many situations where it's like, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? And it's not always as simple. So the main tension in the story of Ruth is that Ruth is a Moabite, and Moabites were sort of the enemy nation that they were not supposed to really interact with at all. And here she is coming to live with them, and there's a little bit of tension with that. But then there's also different parts of the Bible where God talks about how you want to help foreigners, and you need to be there for widows, and you need to provide for them. And it's kind of a confusing situation. It's like, okay, wait, we don't like the Moabites, but we do want to help foreigners. So how do you decide what to do? So it's really cool how Ruth shows how they navigated that tension and kind of gives us some clues for how we can navigate that as well. And one of the things it talks about is living in loving kindness. And that's something that they often attributed to Ruth, is how she walked in loving kindness to other people. So here we go. This is what we're thinking here, is that the highest law is love, and that God is love. And Jesus said later on that the highest commandment is to love God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if we're reading the Bible closely, it looks like going with love is the way to go. So that is what Ruth does, is she fully acts out living kindness, and she's this beautiful woman that she isn't coming in as an enemy. She's coming in as a humble woman who in some ways follows God better than the people who are living there. And you can kind of see that in how she is the one that takes initiative to be there for her mother-in-law, and then she ends up being the one to talk to Boaz, who was the one she was gleaning fields from and getting food for Naomi, and ask him to be to fulfill his role as one of the kinsman redeemers, and pay for, like, buy back their land from their family, and really just to help the lineage of the family she married into keep going. And that was a huge part of their culture, was keeping the land and keeping lineage going in the family. And so Boaz was this relative that could fulfill that, and there's many ways in which she honored him in how she went about asking him to fulfill that, and to end up marrying her in the end, which is really cool. And then another thing that I was really finding interesting in the story of Ruth is how is just the different elements of covenant, in that the covenant was the contract that God made in wanting to be close to his people, and it was sort of this agreement in how they would live so that they could be close to God, and God would be their God and they would be his people. And it was this beautiful thing, but there was always a lot of struggles, and it wasn't something that was fully within the human ability to fully follow the covenant. And we can see in the story of Jesus how God continues to journey with us and ultimately fulfill that. But in the story of Ruth, in the covenant, you can sort of see how she was the one that was living out in the covenant, and the Israelites were not always doing what what was expected or was required of them, in that caring for widows, caring for people was something that they were supposed to do. And it seems like Israel's dropped the ball, or the people around her have dropped the ball a little bit. And you can see that Ruth is following in areas that they are not. And so I think things that I would like to take personally from that is just how walking as Christians, we can now walk in step with the Holy Spirit and walk in loving kindness. And that's sort of how we can live out those sort of confusions or questions, and as we're going through our day-to-day lives. And there's lots of simple, small things that we do that can make a big difference. And there's a lot of small questions that we have, and it's like, okay, how are we walking in loving kindness? How are we walking with the Holy Spirit and following God, even though we don't always understand how to do that best? And then I think the final question that I think I'm still wrestling with as I end off here is, how good are we at loving and caring for people? I think there's been many times that I've seen people outside the church doing a better job sort of loving people, sort of how Ruth was seeming to do a better job of following in God's covenant than the people around her. And sometimes I wonder if we're kind of sometimes, or if I'm sometimes dropping the ball and I'm kind of just living just a normal, happy life, or being a good Christian and not actually really loving people or going the extra mile that Jesus calls us to. So that's sort of what I'm wrestling with and what I'm thinking through. Anyways, thank you guys for going on this journey with me.